Welcome, everybody. Nice to see lots and lots of faces and names. As we're waiting, we'll just wait a minute or so before we get started. We'd encourage people to put in the chat your name and organization so folks know who's here. We'll only be able to see some of the names on the screen at any one time. You can also use the chat for questions, comments, resources as the meeting goes on. You also have the ability to amend your name near your picture, your name, by clicking the three little dots if you hover your mouse over your panel. You all look like really experienced Zoomers with your names muted, although maybe we actually did that to you. So I'm going to officially start. I'll repeat some of this basic information as people come in, but want to recognize that we have just an hour, a lot of folks on, and a lot to cover. So welcome. My name's Peter Allison. I'm the director of FINE. I'm joined today by other colleagues from FINE, Sarah Lyman, Tara Taranovsky, Dana Stevens, and Hannah Layton, who will be playing key roles in the forum as well. Really excited to have all of you join for the second forum that FINE's hosting on responses to the COVID-19 virus from the institutional dining perspective. Today we'll be looking to continue the discussion that some of you were on last week. We want to hear your updated needs and learnings, success stories, and solutions where they exist. And we also will be using part of the time for breakout sessions by sector, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a moment. So just a little bit of Zoom logistics. Staying on mute unless you're speaking is greatly appreciated. We are recording this session. We will also be keeping track of the chat thread, and Dana's taking notes. So we'll be able to share the information that we covered today afterward on our website. So to balance the desire for both general discussion, open discussion, as well as targeted discussion on by sector, we'll be doing breakout rooms. And at this point, would actually like all of you to find the link in the chat room that Sarah's posting in. It goes to a spreadsheet, which we'd like you to write your name the way it's written on the Zoom, and then there's a drop-down menu, and you can click one of the sectors to join that breakout room. Sarah will then assign you to that room, so when we go to breakouts, you'll be sent right there, and we'll tell you more about that in a second. In the last couple of weeks, we've been working to collect information, share resources, and create matches with people who have needs and surplus or haves. And so we've created a matchmaking spreadsheet that's gotten some decent traction. We're curious to see how it's working in terms of actually creating those matches. And so we've reached out to the people who've put information in so far. We've also heard requests from Chicago, San Diego, and Minneapolis, folks who want to use that template for their own purposes, and we're certainly welcoming folks to do so. Our website and newsletter has been sharing some of those resources, so if you go to our homepage, you get directed right to our COVID-19 resource lists and other updates. I mean, from our end, we're hearing a lot of challenges around workforce. In some cases, people needing more labor. In other cases, folks have been having to lay off or reduce hours. And so a lot of interest in figuring out how to meet the needs on both of those sides. Also some regulatory issues that are prohibiting bringing in seasonal workers. Clearly, those who are growing food for the institutional market are concerned about how much market is going to be available come the beginning of the school year. Those who don't service the healthcare corrections annual year-round markets that are staying open, obviously. And just the concern with there's some excess surplus in certain cases and shortage in other cases, and folks figuring out how to make those needs. At Fine, we sort of see our roles focusing around communications and resource sharing, research, connecting and advocating. And in all of the work that we're doing right now, we're looking to adapt our focus to meet this pressing need. And we really welcome suggestions, comments from any of you. At this point, what I'd like to do is open it up to all of you. One more reminder to please go in the spreadsheet, go to the chat and find the spreadsheet link to sign up for one of the breakout rooms. If you don't sign up, you will just remain in this general room, and you'll still have an opportunity to have a conversation. But for those of you who'd like to be in a breakout room by sector, this is a great time to do that. Sarah's actually starting to fill that out as we speak. So the general prompt I want to give to all of you is, what are you experiencing? How are you responding to that? What are you learning? And what is it that you'd like to share? So a very open-ended question about what's on your mind, what are your needs, what would you like to tell us about your experience with the firm's institution or institutional food service more generally in response to COVID-19. Who wants to jump in?
Hi, Peter. This is Kyle Foley. Can you hear me?
Yes, thanks, Kyle.
I'll just jump in and say that on the fishing industry front, there's a lot of folks trying to shift to direct sales, and I know that's been happening on the side as well. So here in Maine, there's a lot of organizations trying to pull together some aggregated sources of information about where, when, and how fishermen are selling product, as well as shellfish farmers and seaweed farmers. We've got a blog post that we put together. There's some other organizations that have gotten some Facebook groups up and running to try and connect folks directly to producers. And we'd be more than happy to hear of ideas about how to better coordinate some of that as time goes on. So I think right now it's a lot of scrambling, and we're trying to think about, along with a couple of other fishing associations, how to make this a little bit more streamlined going forward. So I'll just offer that if anyone's looking for local fish, we've got some resources on our site, and I'm happy to share our blog post in the chat box here that points to some resources, not just in Maine, but also in New Hampshire and Massachusetts.
That's great. And I think Tanya just put one of those in, but any other resources that folks want to add in, we'll be capturing this and adding it to our resource list that's on our website. So really appreciate that. Thanks, Kyle.
This is Becca from New England Dairy. We have actually been working with schools to help them as they transition to a different operating model. So we've been providing like quote unquote mini grants to support coolers so that they can take their service kind of out to the curbside, or in some cases on the bus. And so we've been doing that for the past couple of weeks, and we've also tried to amplify our activities and resources for folks who are working from home and or learning from home.
Thanks, Becca. Becca, are most of the takeout lunches that the schools are giving around New England that you're aware of, including the traditional milk carton?
Yes, right now everyone is receiving milk in their meal unless they like medically cannot take it. Most schools are operating under a summer meals kind of format with those regulations, which includes a milk.
Great, thank you. Thanks to those of you who are putting topics in the chat. That's great. I should say that some of the things that you put in, we may ask you to elaborate on, and you can also choose to pass if you don't want to, or if your mic's not working, for example.
This is Lottie from the Center for an Agricultural Economy up in Hardwick, Vermont. We run a program called Just Cut, where we make a line of minimally processed produce utilizing local farm produce that we set up contracts the year before and then process throughout the course of the entire year for hospitals, universities, and K-12 schools. And as you know, our K-12 schools and universities are mostly down. I know there are meal programs for K-12 right now, but all in all, we are mostly just processing for hospitals right now, and willing to or interested in processing more for more healthcare institutions if there's interest out there, as well as alternative processing projects might be a possibility as well. We are currently doing some bagging of produce for food banks and food pantries of whole vegetables, but we are those are donations, so it would be great to do some more processing that keeps our business afloat.
Thanks, Lottie.
Thank you.
So Christine James has asked how and whether farmers, fishermen, food producers are exploring what programs and funding might be available to you from the recent $2 trillion emergency funding bill. And in general, do you have the sense that people need assistance in determining eligibility or applying for funds? And to what extent are there folks out there that are making their services to help people navigate that system available? Any thoughts there?
Hi, Peter. This is Margaret Christie at CISA in Western Massachusetts. I can say in answer to that question, we are going to be opening up our emergency farm fund, which we've used in the past for weather emergencies, but we've raised money in the last, we've had a really incredible community response in the last week. And so we're going to be able to open it up for this. We're doing it in partnership with the Franklin County CEC and the Pioneer Valley Grows Investment Fund. So we're going to be able to offer no interest loans up to $25,000 for farmers in our 3-county region of Western Massachusetts. And as part of that effort, we'll be working with the CDC to help people understand the other options available, you know, and when is it worth it to you to take out a loan, even when it's a no interest loan, versus using the other programs that are out there. So we see that as kind of a big part of the effort, is understanding those programs to the best of our ability and being able to explain them to farmers and food businesses in our region. And we're really happy that we are doing that in partnership with the CDC and not by ourselves.
Right.
And lots of other people who stepped up to support the loan fund.
And are you in general finding that the information is fairly easy enough to understand so you can then be of service to those who are looking to access it? Or is
I
it?
don't feel like I can answer that question. I'm not the person on our staff who's
Okay.
who's really digging in and trying to understand it, but we are definitely hearing, beginning to hear stories. We got a call from a farmer yesterday who said he had gone in to apply for an SBA loan and was told that farms weren't eligible. And that was not our understanding, or the understanding of anybody else that we've talked to. So clearly, there isn't complete agreement at this stage. That seems unsurprising, but also, concerning. Like, people need to be able to get the information.
Great. I see a few other comments relating to that. Simca talking about confusion from farmers about the relief bill might impact farmers as employers. I'm just gonna take one last moment to ask those of you who haven't yet signed up for a breakout room and want to do that. Sarah's pasted the link in one more time. We have 75 people on the call right now, so the breakout rooms will give us a chance for a little bit smaller focused conversation. Mary Dale DeBoer, do you want to elaborate on your comment about surplus that's generated and the extent, the sort of feasibility of it being able to go to processing operations?
Sure. So I was, this question harks back to your comments about those of us who work with schools, and when schools open at end of August, September. I mean, it's very likely that the schools will remain closed for the rest of this year. And if I understood your statement correctly, you said that there could be shortages and there could be surpluses. My question is, I think we're going to have some surpluses because restaurants are closed. So many sectors are closed, so farmers are needing to look for their outlets. And might there be some partnerships to be had here that when the harvest of crops begins, it's already with some of them going to be soon, is there a way that we could avoid waste of all this product, and send it to processing or minimally processing facilities that are starting to come up, have it, flash frozen, whatever the appropriate method would be given the crop, and then we could create a market for that. I think we need the food service management companies in on this because they run the school food programs for the most part. I mean, I've done some self-ops, and I don't know what we're going to do. We're trying to work on it now, some charter schools. But I'm just wondering if there's any discussion about that, because I am concerned about being able to rechannel product and and to avoid waste of what could be a lot of food.
No, that's certainly the case with the schools and campuses in particular that have had contracts or agreements with producers, and we're hearing a lot of those stories. And I'm wondering if anyone has any sort of success stories that they'd like to share in terms of how some of those school markets have, or other markets have risen up to, in the supply chain, to take product directly from the producers or the processors that are receiving that.
Are there any representatives of Sodexo or Chartwells or anybody on this call? Maybe we ought to set up a channel of communication with those vendors.
Yeah, and we certainly have heard. I'm not sure if there are. I haven't seen the whole list who signed on. One of the things that we will be asking suggestions on is for topics for future forums that might be more focused on, for example, that sort of a particular issue, and then we can kind of drill down a little bit more. So feel free to also offer topics that you'd like to hear additional conversations focused on. And thanks again for people who are chiming in with all these resources and thoughts. As I mentioned at the outset, we'll be taking notes, we'll be capturing the thread from the chat and making the recording available. So between those different strategies, we should be able to pull all this in and work to get the information back out there.
Peter, there's a comment in the chat box about not only using processing facilities, but restaurants to help process food for storage. I wonder if anybody has any examples in their community or in their area of working with restaurants that may have extra capacity or kitchen space. We saw one kitchen space surplus pop up in the spreadsheet, and I'd love to hear about any collaborations with restaurants as well.
Hi, Hannah. This is Joe Blenda from Forager. I was the one who made that comment in the chat. I brought it up because it came up in one of the phone calls we had hosted, one of the Zooms. It was in New Hampshire. Three Rivers Farmer Alliance had done a deal with restaurants so that they took in an increasing amount and an increasing diversity of local food from farms, and then turned that into meals that were then, in this case, it was a consumer-facing solution. So I brought it up here because my company is relatively new to the institutional space and food service, and so wondering if that model would be viable, because I think there are a number of restaurants who have obviously labor that is furloughed or in danger of not reopening, and probably have kitchen capacity and capability that they could leverage for something like this if there was a place to store the food after it had been pre-processed into meals.
That's a good question, Joe. Folks can chime in or, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say there's a resource that was dropped in with examples in Minnesota in the chat box, and if anybody else has examples they want to share now.
I think if this were an idea that works, it would be potentially fairly easy to go to restaurant advocacy groups and things like that, find out who can get the attention of restaurants that might have capacity, if the model works for you guys, for this group.
There are a couple of examples in our area, as I'm sure there are in lots of other places, of restaurants that are, just figuring out on their own how to go above and beyond. There's a restaurant in this area that's making sandwiches that are being distributed with school meals on school buses so that they can drop off food not only for kids but for parents with the food that's being donated by the restaurant. There's another restaurant that's done that's doing takeout every night, but they closed one night and just did free food for laid off, restaurant workers. So there's those kind of stellar and heartwarming, individual stories that I'm sure there's tons of everywhere. But to figure out how to scale those and do them on a widespread basis is a different question.
Great.
Hi, this is Jen Nelson from in the Chicago area, and I would agree. We've got stellar examples. Keeps coming. Like how going to be for their continue doing this on a basis. So I started a group that focused on working with vendors and to determine feasibility for getting money behind something coordinated in this area.
Thanks, Jen. You were breaking up a little bit. If you have the ability to put that in the chat so we could just capture it, that would be a big help as well. When Zoom fails us. Allie, I'm wondering if you would elaborate on the comment you put in chat about the restrictions on farmers with the SBA and some of the strategies that are being taken to try and help them get access.
Yeah, so the main beginning farmer network, resource network, did talk about the SBA loan. Maine was the first recipient of that program, and so we were really excited about it. But we did learn that it's the disaster loan is exempt. So typically, farmers would get loans from FSA. And SBA is really reserved for other businesses. But I do believe I heard through our leadership that there is some effort to remove that exemption for farmers with the SBA. So like I said in the chat, this is a good follow-up with SBA and also congressional delegations to see where we're at with that. And I don't know if it's an executive change that would have to occur or through congressional, through an act of Congress. So that's sort of the gist of that.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to actually see if Gregory Wolf, if you'd be willing to share your comment in response to the questions about the role of the food service management companies in terms of the experience at Brandeis and the connection with hospitals. And this may be the last one we have before we switch over to the breakout rooms. Are you vocal, Gregory? Chime in if you are. He writes, and you may have seen this, that Sodexo is operating out of Brandeis to supply Boston hospitals with to-go food for employees as hospitals close their employee dining rooms, and they're doing this at cost. So there may be an opportunity there in terms of sort of redeploying the university food service to help with some of the other sector food service needs.
There's a sort of related side conversation also going on about the kind of support that could be provided in connecting hospitals with surplus food or labor. I think that's the gist of this conversation. I wonder if Shelley or Marydale, do you want to bring that to the group and talk a little bit about your ideas here?
Sorry, this is Marydale. I think maybe what's being referred to here is the food service management companies and then the vendors they use. If one could map or imagine an alternative, a new kind of pipeline, a supply chain from producers. Of course, they'd probably already have to be approved vendors, which is a barrier, but we are in a worldwide crisis, so maybe people could be brave and rise to the occasion and figure that out. But I mean, the people with capacity are the food service management companies and the broadliners, and they already have the channels set up. So if the mechanism could be to figure out how any surplus that's produced, and again, I'm thinking of the space of not providing emergency food, but saving crops, minimally processing them, storing them so they can be purchased by schools or others, and we don't have a full season of crop lost. Maybe I don't know enough about the production end, but I do know a little bit about the companies. I think we ought to try to reach out to them and talk to them and see what they're willing to do. Not to be a Pollyanna, because you know sometimes those companies are hard to deal with, but this is a completely new situation we're in. I hope that comment's helpful.
Yeah. And one thing I heard, Patty from Tuss connected me with one of the producers that they had been buying from, and talking to him about his interest in trying to reach retail markets, and that just the different insurance requirements was to be a prohibition. Yeah. You know, so I'm just wondering, one of the questions I have is whether USDA or anyone else is looking at, are there ways that those insurance needs could be met so that some of these producers could actually move their product to some of the other outlets where they exist.
Kind of interesting to see what UMass is doing, what Ken's doing over there. Maybe you already know, Peter, I don't know.
Yeah, I believe that UMass Amherst, which is one of the biggest institutional dining operations in the country, is continuing to do a fair bit of takeout. And so they've already had sort of a setup for that. So they're sort of continuing, at least at some scale, to be producing food and for to go.
Peter, I believe we have someone from UMass Amherst. I think it's Chris Holland is on the call. If he would like to.
Hey, how's everyone doing, folks?
Hey, Chris.
Hey.
Hey, I was actually I'm just in Berkshire right now, getting some takeout. Yeah, so we have 3 locations open. They're all doing takeout, just because we can't have anyone having sitting down in the facilities, because that's outlawed right now, and it makes sense. But we're probably doing about 1,500 meals a day, which may sound like a lot, but we're used to doing 50,000 meals a day. So, but we're still buying a little bit of local. We do have a fair amount of local proteins actually in our freezer, so we're actually still continuing to be able to source and use a lot of those particular products. But as you can imagine, like dairy's way down, just produce in general is way down, just because we don't have the demand right now. And I think one of the things that folks need to start thinking about is that we can make plans for using local items for here till eternity. However, we don't know what that demand's going to be, and that's the biggest thing. That's the uncertainty of knowing what the demand is going to be, not only now but in the summer and also in the fall. We just don't know, and that could cripple the local economy. So I mean, we need to start thinking about how we can help farmers now, how we help them in the summer, and what the fall looks like. Because honestly, like students on campus drives this demand. If we don't have students on campus, if we don't have summer programming, then that all falls through. And what happens when that happens, right?
Right.
So I don't know if people have thought that far out, but just taking a look at how the national environment is. I mean, we haven't even hit the peak of this, and we're I know the local school systems in Massachusetts are closed until May. So I don't know what that's going to look like, what our current environment is going to look like in 2 weeks, in a month, in 2 months, and what the recovery is going to look like, and how we can actually get customers to have confidence in the food safety or in the food system. And the other thing that I also want to mention was what happens when people have a limited budget and it comes down to buying a local carrot that's a little more expensive, or buying a commodity carrot which is less expensive, but it makes their dollar go further. I don't know. I've talked to a lot of vendors, and they're worried about the resiliency of a local economy when it comes down to customers not having enough money to make ends meet. And we're talking 3.5 million people out of work. It's only going to go up. It could be a quick recovery, but we don't know. And how do we look at that when it comes to the bigger picture?
Right. As if our work wasn't hard enough before. So we have this new reality in front of us and new challenges, and it's amazing to see the number of people that are fully engaged and working to address it. What I'm going to do now, and we are very interested in your feedback on our format and how these forums go, so we can continue to make them as useful to you as possible. But we're going to shift over to the breakout rooms that you've signed up for. Those of you who didn't will stay in this space. Sarah will be leading this. I'll be leading the group with the health, or facilitating the group with the healthcare. Dana Stevens will be with the K through 12. Tanya will be with the campus groups, and Hannah will be with folks who signed up for producer, fisher, farmer breakout group. And they'll give you a little bit more details about how those are going to work. We're going to bounce you back into this room with about 10 minutes to go. We'll hear a quick report from each group and then ask for your feedback for how we can continue to work to support your efforts moving forward. So in a moment, you will all be sent away.
Peter, I just want to add to the group. I've done my best to assign folks as they had requested, but I may have made an error, and there was also a flurry of activity in that spreadsheet. So if you get bumped into a room that you didn't want to be in, just leave the room. It'll put you back into the main area where I am, and just let me know which one you'd prefer to be in, and I'll just reassign you. It'll just take an extra minute.
And I put the link in one more time.
Well, I'm gonna send folks to breakouts right now, okay. So you'll know if you've been assigned incorrectly. So All right, we'll do that right now. All right, anybody else that I goofed on? All right. So because this is sort of the random group or those who chose not to be elsewhere, I think we can have a pretty broad discussion. And I was wondering if anybody wanted to volunteer to have a takeaway. We're gonna have time when we all rejoin to report back, just like probably have time for one takeaway, if anybody's willing to take that on. Or I can do that if you want. Any requests for conversation topics? Because I mean, I have some really broad brush strokes, like what are you experiencing? What challenges are you particularly faced with? What new solutions have you learned about?
Yes, Sarah. Hey, it's Gabrielle from Seven Valleys Health Coalition in the Cortland area of New York. I actually still wanted to stay in the broad group because I'm working under a grant that's a DEC food rescue grant, and we really weren't supposed to have anything set up for it's a 3-year grant. So the first year of our grant was just going to be like initial assessment, what's going on in our community, food pantry stuff, local grocery stores, food access, working with a food bank, all of that. But it kind of just hit the fan and exploded. So we are like flying the plane as we make it. And so I mean, we've been working, Seven Valleys has been working with heads of school to get the school food distribution plan up. We've also been doing stuff with local food banks and food pantries to make sure they're up and running and what's going on with them. So as an organization, we've done a lot with food access so far, but it's been pretty all over the place. And right now we're hearing a lot of access. We had somebody contact us from Sackett's Harbor in New York and said they had 1,000 pounds of hydroponic greens, and they're coming to Cortland tomorrow. So it's been that kind of stuff.
Wow.
And so I don't know if anybody has any insight on how to move excess food to certain areas. Some food pantries are going to take that excess greens, but not all of them. We've actually had a lot of food pantries closed down because we're in a really rural area. So we have a lot of church-run pantries who are just completely closing the door. So that's been a bit difficult. So if anybody has any insight, I'm all ears.
Hi, Gabrielle. This is Jessica with the Greater Nashua Food Council in New Hampshire. I'm also originally from upstate New York, though. And we have been doing pop-up mobile pantries where we have been distributing excess fresh produce. Our soup kitchen is getting inundated with fresh produce, so we've had to kind of think on the fly. So one of the things we do is on Fridays when the students come to pick up their bagged breakfast and lunch, at our most vulnerable schools are the ones that have the highest rates of free and reduced lunch participation. We distribute box produce at those locations for them to pick up with their school meals. And then we also have ones that are in certain, and this is a more urban area versus rural, but certain locations where we are distributing. So if it's an apartment complex or a senior housing location, we're using volunteers, folding table, 2 chairs. The volunteers are being supplied with hand sanitizers and cleaning supplies, and their job is just to make sure that everybody kind of maintains that safe space and a line that they can pick up their produce and then head home safely.
Great, thank you for that. I know that in our area, we actually have a big mobile food pantry that's happening tonight at one of the bigger churches, in the city of Cortland area. And there was one that happened about a few days ago. But it's trying to link into existing services and foundations. But I love the idea of tacking on to the school distributions, especially on a Friday, where the kids, they get some extra to take home for the weekend, but to kind of fill in those gaps. So that's a great point. Thank you so much.
I'm hoping that as people discuss this on an even larger scale or longer term scale, we'll get to the point where we can handle large amounts of fresh produce, because this is certainly not a situation that our food pantries are used to having to deal with. But when you got palletized broccoli, and what are you going to do with it? And that's the call I got yesterday. Who can depackage that like unpackage it, repackage it, and get it out so it can be used. And I think hopefully we can come up with some bigger institutional solutions for that soon.
I don't know if I was focused on reassigning folks when Peter was discussing this. Did he mention our matchmaking spreadsheet?
He did mention it. Yeah, he mentioned it, and
okay, great.
I'm from the Chicago area, and so we're the group that has adapted yours, and it's launching today for Illinois. So thank you for sharing.
Great. Just want to make sure it gets out there. Yeah, it's not really an institutional system at this point. It's sort of, like you said, Gabrielle, the flying the plane while you're building it, which I think everyone is right now.
Hi, this is Lindsay from Metro DC, and Sarah, thank you to you and everybody at Fine for making your forums open. I've used your resources a lot in the past, and look to you all as, you know, some of our leading national experts on this issue. I think to that point about matching, I would be curious to know if anyone in the group has like active food rescue operations in their communities that are, you know, leveraging technology to make those matches. And if folks are in a time and place where they're able to collaborate, you know, using some of those existing systems. I have to be honest, we have several in our region, and I know that they're still active, but you know, the issues that have come up around like volunteer labor, for instance, with some of our food banks, I think they're likely going to experience themselves. So I'm just curious if anybody has any thoughts or experience to share on that question.
I mean, we've been mostly in this research phase. Like our first year was really supposed to be this research phase, and our year really started a little bit before 2020 hit. So this was like kind of like we just got thrown into it. But we had been working with Food Rescue Alliance out in Colorado. They're actually like this national network, and they connect all sorts of food rescues together to share resources. And they're actually developing a software right now that's kind of like that. In some ways it's for volunteer management, but in other ways it's to connect people that have excess food to people who need it, and then using food rescue groups to kind of be that go-between and shuffling. We also are very close by to Ithaca, New York, and Ithaca has a great food rescue program that's happening, Friendship Donation Network, excuse me, that's what it is. And we went and toured their stuff late last year, and they're doing great things as far as the resources. They've been around for almost 20 years. And so we've been trying to take what they have learned over those years and apply it to us, but there's still a lot to learn. I think that every food rescue group that we have talked to, and I've talked to a lot across the United States, is like, you're constantly learning how to do things better, and that whole connection of like the access to get it to where it's needed is still kind of bumpy. And there's not, everybody's using kind of different software, or Google Forms or Google Spreadsheets, or their own version of like a mapping system. So I've heard a lot of variety.
We're definitely seeing that too. We actually have a national provider based in our region that has a platform called Means Database that I'd also recommend looking at. It's capital MEANS. I'm more curious about what's their status like right now. Like, are they seeing the same issues around volunteer management that a lot of the food banks are? And if nobody can answer that question, I totally understand. And thanks for sharing, Gabrielle.
Yeah, I think I can speak a little bit into that because I was on a food rescue call similar to this last week. And I think there's kind of a difference between food rescue groups actually call a lot of volunteers that are younger. A lot of times they use bikes to rescue food in areas that don't get snow. And so they're like having these great young people that bike to the stores with these essentially like little trailer carts and collect all the food from the stores and then go back to the hub. And so I think they're a little bit in a better position because they're younger, whereas a food pantry almost always is like church related. Some of it's organizational run, but they have older volunteers, and so they're really just shutting down. That's what we've at least seen in New York and definitely in our county. And so that's why we're trying to utilize some younger people to do this, but they're doing a lot of it is going to like the hands-off mode, which everybody's kind of going to, is like, if you have a donation, like just leave it outside or like leave it on your loading dock if you're a store and you have to move a lot of produce, leave it there. We'll come and get it, put it in our cars. Like, we don't even have a new sign, like, don't worry about the weight of the product right now. Like, they're just kind of throwing all that to the wind, and then they're dropping it off places with the volunteers, like not even in connection. They're scheduling staggered shifts and things like that.
Thanks so much.
We are going to have about a 2-minute warning here, so I just wanted to let folks know as we're wrapping up.
Before we merge into a bigger group, just thank you everybody for listening and for your feedback, and the few little things that I gleaned out of this are very helpful, so thanks.
Good luck. Welcome to a new grant that has to be rewritten as you're starting. A lot of my work is grant funded, and I totally feel your pain.
Yep.
We're probably going to lose some of these chat resources, so I'm going to just do a quick copy paste. Are there any other resources that you wanted to copy in there that I should pull over to our notes just before we lose it? Actually, we'll probably retain the main chat since we're in the main room.
So did you already know how to handle breakout rooms? Or is this something that you
learned a lot in the last week.
That's exactly where I am.
Yeah, we've done breakout rooms before, but not with 75 people. So we wanted to make it as seamless as possible. Obviously, it wasn't perfect, but if you have experience that would guide us, do let us know.
No, I'm learning as I go as well. I was texting my colleague Susan, and I'm like, you're showing up with my name. She's not going to know who to send where. Change your name.
Great. I'm going to let folks back in now. So feel free to continue talking, but you'll just have more people listening.
Thank you.
Are we back yet?
Back.
Okay. Welcome back. Thank you all for hanging in there. I hope the groups are good. I'd like to have a really quick go round from each of the groups, a minute or less, a takeaway. And Betsy's going to start with the healthcare group. And you need to unmute yourself.
So our conversation covered a few different areas. One is just, Healthcare Without Harm has been doing a group in New England to talk about kind of the on the ground, what's happening in hospitals, how they're serving meals and pieces like that. But overall, a lot of the hospitals we've been talking with, their demand for food is just down right now because their patient census is down without all the elective activities that normally happen, especially those that are, outside the greater Boston area where they haven't had a surge in patients yet. So they're even seeing their food service workers deployed to different areas of the hospital. There is, the other thing we kind of talked about was how community is turning to support the hospitals and feeding, hospital workers as restaurants are, making meals that hospital staff can potentially just take home and eat, and just the need for more supply chain connections so that we can better connect the supply with the institutions that could potentially use the product, particularly for processed products that's ready to use and requires less labor on their end.
Great. Thank you. And I know you guys had rich conversations. We're going to just go with a quick update. So the farm to school group, need to unmute.
Yeah, we actually didn't discuss who was going to report back, so I'll go ahead and do that. We spent a little time talking about examples of produce in general, and local produce, and dairy being included in any of these new emergency meals that are going out. So we collected a few of those stories and want to continue to collect more of those. There was one, there's a couple actual products that are available in the region, like carrot coins from Joe Tchaikovsky and Carlson's Orchard 4-ounce apple sauce cups that some districts are using. And it seems like those farmers and producers are interested in selling to other districts as well. So there's some opportunity to share actual products that folks could be including in those meals. And we also identified that there, like a lot of professionals, there are some needs for protective equipment for school nutrition staff that are making these meals and getting them out to the students.
Thanks, Dana. We welcome comments in the chat, and Hannah just posted a survey that we'd also appreciate you taking for a few minutes. Hannah, do you want to give us a little bit what happened in the producer room?
Yeah, Josh is going to give a quick update.
Great.
Yeah, so we kind of focused or started our conversation off of what we're hearing from farmers, what questions they're asking and resources they need. Some good notes. We've been hearing, for the most part, folks reported that they were hearing farmers still have access to protective gear and sanitation items like gloves and cleaning supplies. H2A labor was obviously a big question, and it sounds like there's been some positive movement on some of that in terms of consulates being reopened or staying opened and getting some movement there. The other thing was sort of folks directing their operations to direct sales, and whether there's any resources for them in transitioning, and whether there might be any regulatory relaxing of laws or rules for this period of time as different farms work together, maybe formally, informally, how that stuff is going to work.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think that's sort of basically it.
Perfect, Josh. 1 minute on the nose. Campus sector.
Andrew, you want to jump in and share for us, please?
Yeah, sure. We did a go around of what folks are dealing with immediately and pressing questions. And I think across from the folks that were sitting in the campus setting is that they have a lot of capacity right now that's untapped because if they're keeping employees on, they've got staff capacity serving a small fraction of the meals. And so we started doing a little brainstorming. I think there could be more about how to use that, both the physical infrastructure and the staff that are there. And also we touched on how keeping folks safe, the staff distant, and just training them on how to be safe and continue their work.
Thank you, Andrew. And Sarah, bring us home with the a la carte group, the main room.
I like a la carte, that's nice. We talked a lot about food access, food banks, and how to connect those with surplus to those who are distributing in a variety of ways. Pop-up mobile kitchens, the differences between volunteer challenges. In some food banks, they tend to be staffed by volunteers who tend to be older church-run facilities, and food rescue groups often use younger volunteers, for example, biking to stores and delivering to hubs and things. So those tend to be in a better position. And so trying to figure out how those that are still interested in doing the work can be connected with facilities that are still open. Many of those have closed. And I also wanted to pass along a resource recommended by Lindsay. I think you suggested this, called the Means Database. Actually, I'm going to put it right in the chat here, which is a database to connect food donations. So that's the short version.
Thank you, everyone. We really welcome additional resources, suggestions, recommendations, and how we can support, as well as the success stories that we would be more than happy to continue to share. There's amazing stuff happening, but it's also incredibly challenging time, to say the least. We will be back in touch with the notes, the recording, the chat discussion, and the next steps that we'll be taking to help continue the conversation and help meet needs as best we can here at Find. So we'll actually leave this open for a second if people want to continue to add in resources or chat. And yes?
Can I just follow up on the SBA question? I've had some communications, and I'm just continuously reminded that everyone should reach out to SBA directly for questions. So we certainly believe that farms aren't eligible, but they are really receptive to feedback and very helpful.
Great. Thanks, Allie. So once again, we'll leave this open for a little bit, but we'll officially be ending the call right now. Thanks again, everyone, for your input and participation, and please stay in touch.